The Arkansas River moved slow that morning, carrying the weight of silence. Mist rolled above the muddy water, thick enough to blur the line between sky and earth. A fisherman named Joe Miller cast his line near the old iron bridge, just as he did every Saturday since he retired from the paper mill. But that morning the river gave him something else. The hook caught on fabric. He tugged once, twice, then froze. The pale blue of a cheerleader's uniform floated just beneath the surface. Joe stumbled back, shouting toward the empty bank, voice trembling with disbelief. By the time deputies arrived, the sun had risen, shining down on what the whole town would soon whisper about. 17-year-old Chloe Benson had been found. In Little Rock High, word spread before the first bell rang. Students gathered in the hallways, whispering her name like a ghost story. Someone said she'd gone missing after the bonfire near the river. Someone else swore they saw her leave with Tyler Ray, her boyfriend. By lunchtime, the principal made an announcement. Grief counselors would be available, and classes would continue as scheduled. But no one was listening. Detective Frank Dillard, a man whose gray hair came early from too many late nights on the job, stood by the water's edge. His boots sank into the soft ground as he studied the scene. Chloe Benson, honor roll student, varsity cheerleader, daughter of a mechanic and a nurse, had everything going for her. But now she was just another case file in a department that already had too many. He turned to Deputy Rhodes. Get statements from everyone at that bonfire. Teachers, parents, whoever. Somebody knows something. Rhodes nodded, eyes down. You think this was an accident? Dillard didn't answer. He looked out at the slow-moving water. No river gives up its secrets easy, he said quietly. Across town, Rachel Porter sat in her bedroom, staring at a photo on her dresser. She and Chloe were side by side, arms around each other, grinning under the Friday night lights. The picture was from last fall's homecoming game. Rachel's throat tightened. She replayed their last conversation, the argument about Tyler, the words she couldn't take back. Her mother knocked softly. Honey, you should eat something. Rachel didn't move. They found her, didn't they? Her mother hesitated. They did. Rachel closed her eyes, the sound of the river echoing in her mind. That evening, as the local news played, the anchor's voice trembled. Authorities in Little Rock have confirmed the discovery of 17-year-old Chloe Benson near the Arkansas River earlier today. Police are investigating the circumstances surrounding her death. Detective Dillard watched from his office, tapping his pen against the desk. The town wanted quick answers, but he'd seen too many cases like this, stories that twisted deeper than anyone expected, and as he stared at the photo of Chloe pinned to the caseboard, he knew one thing for sure. Little Rock would never be the same again. Stay with us, because the truth behind the river's silence is only beginning to rise. By Monday morning, the flag outside Little Rock High hung at half-staff. The parking lot buzzed with reporters, camera vans, and students too young to understand how grief could feel like fog, thick, slow, and everywhere. Inside, the hallways smelled of floor wax and tension. Everyone knew Chloe Benson. You couldn't walk 10 steps without hearing her name. She was the kind of girl teachers adored, and boys stumbled over themselves to impress. Honor roll, cheer captain, volunteer at St. Mary's Church. Yet now, every locker she'd passed, every friend she'd laughed with carried a weight. Rachel Porter sat at her desk, tracing the edge of a notebook. The guidance counselor had spoken for 10 minutes about processing emotions, but Rachel couldn't hear any of it. She remembered Chloe's laugh, sharp, bright, alive. It didn't fit with the image on the news, the one of a sheet by the riverbank. At the back of the classroom, Evan Miller sketched quietly, pencil moving in slow, deliberate strokes. Evan had always been the quiet one, the kind who saw things others missed. His notebook was full of faces, classmates, teachers, the town itself, but now every page was Chloe. The curve of her smile, the way her hair caught sunlight. He kept drawing, as if the act itself could bring her back. Tyler Ray didn't show up that day. His friends said the cops had already questioned him twice. Captain of the football team, son of a prominent businessman, Tyler had always been Little Rock's golden boy. To most, he was Chloe's perfect match. But Rachel knew their fights. She'd seen them behind the bleachers, heard the sharp words that cut through the cheers. After class, Rachel found herself walking past the trophy case. Chloe's picture stared back at her from last season's cheerleading squad. She stopped, whispering under her breath, "Why didn't you tell me what was going on?" Behind her, a voice said softly, "She wouldn't have wanted anyone to know." Rachel turned. Evan stood there, sketchbook tucked under his arm. His eyes were red-rimmed but calm. "What do you mean?" she asked. He hesitated. Chloe wasn't happy. Not the way everyone thought. She was trying to get out, leave Little Rock after graduation. She said she felt stuck here. Rachel frowned. "That doesn't mean—" Evan interrupted gently. "No, it doesn't. But sometimes people hide what hurts them most." The hallway fell silent as a janitor switched off the fluorescent lights. For a moment, only the hum of distant traffic filled the air. That evening, Rachel sat by her window, watching the last light fade over the Arkansas hills. She thought about Chloe's secrets, about the way Tyler had gripped her arm at the dance, the way Chloe had laughed it off. Everyone knew Chloe Benson, but Rachel was starting to realize no one really did. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, faint but lingering, like a reminder that in Little Rock nothing stayed buried for long. The week after Chloe's body was found, Little Rock High turned into a rumor factory. Every corner of the hallway hummed with theories. Some said she'd slipped near the river and drowned. Others whispered about jealousy, a fight, a secret she'd been hiding. No one spoke too loud, but everyone wanted to be the first to say they knew what really happened. Detective Frank Dillard walked through the school's narrow hallways, his badge clipped to his belt, his eyes sharp and quiet. The principal trailed behind, nervous. "Detective, the kids are shaken up," he said softly. "Please keep it discreet." Dillard nodded. "Discreet's my middle name." He stepped into the cafeteria where Rachel Porter sat with two other girls, untouched food on her tray. He recognized her from the case file, Chloe's best friend. When he approached, the girls fell silent. "Rachel," Dillard said, "mind if I sit a minute?" She nodded, eyes fixed on the table. "You were at the bonfire, right?" Rachel swallowed. "Everyone was." "Did you see Chloe leave?" "No. I thought she was with Tyler." "Tyler Ray?" She nodded again. Her hands trembled slightly as she twisted the ring on her finger. Dillard's voice softened. "You and Chloe were close. Anything bothering her lately?" Rachel hesitated. "She wasn't sleeping much. Said she was tired of pretending." I didn't know what she meant. Before Dillard could ask more, the bell rang and students flooded the halls. The detective stood, leaving his card on the table. "If you remember anything," he said, "no matter how small, call me." That afternoon, Evan Miller sat on the bleachers behind the gym, sketchbook open on his knees. The page showed Chloe's face again, eyes wide, expression calm but distant. The shadows under her eyes were darker this time. Rachel found him there. "You're still drawing her?" she asked. Evan didn't look up. "I can't stop. It's like she's trying to tell me something." Rachel frowned. "You think she was scared?" He paused. "I think she knew something bad was coming." She sat beside him, the air heavy with late autumn chill. "Tyler says he dropped her off around midnight." "The cops don't believe him." Evan's pencil stilled. "Would you?" Rachel shook her head slowly. "No." Meanwhile, Detective Dillard met with Deputy Rhodes at the station. A report lay open between them. "Witness saw a blue pickup near the river that night," Rhodes said. Dillard exhaled. "Tyler drives one. Get a warrant. We'll take a look." The radio crackled, the static filling the silence. Dillard glanced at the photo pinned above his desk, Chloe smiling in her cheer uniform. Every case started the same. A picture-perfect life, a town that swore it couldn't happen here. And every time, the truth waited somewhere in the shadows. Outside, the last bell of the day echoed through the empty halls. Somewhere among the lockers and whispered lies, the story of what happened to Chloe Benson was waiting to be found. The night Chloe disappeared was supposed to be a celebration, the end of the football season, the last bonfire before winter. Students from Little Rock High gathered by the riverbank, their laughter echoing over the dark water. Someone brought an old radio, its static blending with the crackle of flames. The air smelled of smoke, cheap beer, and damp leaves. Rachel remembered every detail. Chloe wore her favorite denim jacket, the one with the torn sleeve. She looked beautiful that night, glowing under the firelight. Tyler Ray had his arm around her, showing off like always, but Chloe's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Evan Miller stood a few yards away, sketchbook tucked under his arm. He'd come only because Chloe asked him to. "Just for an hour," she'd said earlier. "I need a break from all the noise." Now she was surrounded by it. As the night deepened, tension began to hum beneath the music. Tyler had been drinking. Rachel saw the shift in his expression, the easy charm replaced by a hard edge. When Chloe drifted toward the river with a group of friends, Tyler followed. Rachel hesitated, then turned away. She didn't want to be part of another argument. Later, Evan saw Chloe alone near the water. She was skipping stones, her reflection breaking with each ripple. He approached quietly. "You okay?" he asked. She turned, startled, then smiled faintly. "Just needed air. You shouldn't be down here by yourself. I know, I just needed to think." She stared at the black current. "Sometimes I feel like I could stand here forever, just watching it move." Evan frowned. "You sound like you're saying goodbye." Chloe's smile faded. "Maybe I am." Before he could respond, headlights swept across the trees. Tyler's blue pickup rolled down the dirt path, music blasting. He leaned out the window. "Chloe, get in, we're leaving." Chloe sighed, brushing hair from her face. "Tyler, please, now," he snapped. Evan stepped forward. "She said she's fine." Tyler's glare hardened. "Stay out of it, Miller. Go draw something." Rachel arrived just as Chloe climbed reluctantly into the truck. The engine roared, and the pickup disappeared down the trail. Rachel remembered calling after her, but Chloe didn't look back. Hours later, the bonfire burned low, embers glowing like dying stars. Rachel waited for a ride that never came. Evan packed his sketchbook and walked home under the flickering streetlights, uneasy, unable to shake the image of Chloe's face in the dark. By morning, her parents reported her missing. They said she hadn't come home, hadn't called, hadn't left a note. The police searched the trails, the bridge, the banks, and by sunrise, Joe Miller's fishing line would catch on something the river had refused to hide. That night by the water had begun like any other. But in Little Rock, no one who was there would ever forget how the firelight reflected off the river, or how silence swallowed it whole. By December, the search for Chloe Benson had turned from desperate to quiet. The flyers stapled to telephone poles faded in the winter rain. The local news stopped running nightly updates. The story that once held Little Rock in its grip slowly slipped into the background like the fog rolling off the Arkansas River. Detective Frank Dillard kept the case file on his desk longer than most. Each morning, he opened it, hoping for something he'd missed, a name, a witness, a thread to pull, but the evidence was thin. The autopsy confirmed drowning, but there were bruises on her wrists unclear in origin. No fingerprints, no clear cause beyond the river's pull. Deputy Rhodes leaned in the doorway one morning, coffee in hand. "You can't keep staring at that file forever, Frank. Sometimes people just fall." Dillard didn't look up. "Girls like Chloe don't just fall into rivers, Jim." Rhodes sighed. "We did what we could." But Dillard knew better. He'd seen it before, how a small-town tragedy turns into silence once it makes people uncomfortable. Parents didn't want their kids questioned. The school wanted the story gone. Even the sheriff's office had other priorities. He closed the file and looked out the window. Snow drifted across the parking lot, dusting the hood of his cruiser. Somewhere out there, he thought, someone knew what really happened that night. Across town, Rachel Porter sat in her room, the radio playing softly. Chloe's picture hung on her corkboard beside a folded letter she'd written but never sent, an apology for their last argument. Rachel had told her she was acting crazy, that Tyler loved her, and she should stop overthinking. Now those words echoed louder than any news report. Her mother knocked lightly. "Sweetheart, you should come to dinner. I'm not hungry. You can't keep doing this. It's been weeks." Rachel turned away from the door. "She was my best friend. I can't just move on." Her mother didn't answer. The silence between them said everything. Tyler Ray, meanwhile, disappeared from public view. His family hired a lawyer. The blue pickup was searched, but no evidence linked him to Chloe's death. Rumors followed him anyway, angry whispers in the hallway, glances at the gas station. He stopped showing up at school, then at all. By spring, the investigation was officially suspended. Dillard signed the paperwork reluctantly, scrawling his name under the words insufficient evidence. He stared at the signature for a long moment before closing the folder for the last time. The box was stored in the evidence room, labeled Benson Chloe, 1995. It joined a row of other forgotten names. Little Rock moved on, as small towns do. The river kept flowing, the seasons changed, and people found new things to talk about. But for Rachel, and for the man who once swore to bring answers, the story wasn't over. It was only sleeping, and in every quiet moment, the same question lingered. What really happened the night Chloe Benson went to the river? It had been 25 years since Chloe Benson's body was found near the Arkansas River. The small town of Little Rock had moved on. Time did what it always does. It softened the sharp edges of pain, blurred the details, and let people forget. But for Rachel Porter, returning to Little Rock was like opening a door to a room she'd locked long ago. Rachel stood outside her mother's house, clutching the keys in her hand. Her mother had passed a year earlier, and now Rachel had come back to sort through the remnants of her childhood. It wasn't a trip she had planned. It had simply become inevitable. The house was quieter now. The place where she'd grown up felt hollow, like a piece of her past that hadn't quite aged with her. The local newspaper tucked in the mailbox caught her eye. The headline read, Arkansas Cold Case Unit reopens 1995 River Incident. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. The story had been buried for so long that the mention of Chloe's name still had the power to knock the breath from her lungs. The police were reopening the case. She had to know more. Inside the house, the old family photographs hung on the walls, staring down at her. Chloe's face smiled back from a picture she had never fully let go of. It was taken at the homecoming dance, Rachel, Chloe, and their friends, grinning like nothing could ever go wrong. That memory seemed so distant, like a different lifetime. Rachel found herself holding the photo, studying Chloe's face again, wondering how much of what she had known was really true. There had been whispers over the years, rumors about the night Chloe died, about what she had been planning to do after graduation. But nobody had ever really asked the right questions, at least not loud enough to make a difference. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find a man in his late 60s, dressed in a faded jacket and worn boots. He introduced himself as Frank Dillard, the retired detective who had investigated Chloe's case all those years ago. Rachel felt her heart tighten. Dillard had been one of the few who had never given up on Chloe, even after the case went cold. He was a stranger to her now, but his presence made everything feel real again. "You must be Rachel," he said with a gentle smile. "I know this must be hard for you." Rachel hesitated before nodding. "It is. I didn't expect this, you know." 25 years later, she trailed off, unsure of how to continue. "I know. It's like waking up from a long sleep," Dillard said softly. "But I didn't come here to dredge up painful memories. I came because we think we've found something that might change everything." He held out a manila folder. "Do you mind if we talk?" Rachel felt the weight of the moment settle in her chest. She hadn't expected this conversation. The cold case, Chloe's death, all of it had been shoved into the back of her mind. But now it was all coming back, and the truth she had been avoiding for years was starting to feel just out of reach. She took the folder. "Let's talk." Rachel sat in the worn-out chair across from Detective Dillard, the folder heavy between them. The air in the room was thick, filled with the scent of old wood and dust. Outside, the soft hum of a passing car was the only sound, a quiet contrast to the chaos that had once swept through Little Rock all those years ago. Dillard opened the manila folder slowly, his fingers brushing over the edges, as if the contents held weight he hadn't yet fully grasped. "You were Chloe's closest friend, Rachel," he said, his voice low and steady. That night you were the one who saw her last. Rachel nodded, her throat tight. The memories of that night flooded her mind. Chloe's smile, her hesitation when Tyler had called her over, the way the world had seemed to stop as the pickup truck disappeared down the trail. She had wanted to stop them, wanted to call after her friend, but it had all felt so wrong, so complicated. She never spoke of it again after that night, burying her guilt with every passing year. I've gone over this case 100 times, but there's always been something off about it, Dillard continued, his eyes now on Rachel. The autopsy didn't show much, but the bruising on Chloe's wrists. I need you to think back. Did she ever mention anything to you? Anything about Tyler? Or maybe someone else? Rachel's mind raced, trying to sift through the haze of years and memories. There had always been something about Tyler, something that made her uncomfortable. She remembered the way he'd grabbed Chloe's arm at the dance, the coldness that had crept into his voice when Chloe had questioned him. But Chloe never let anyone see it, always brushing off his actions with a laugh. It was like she was trying to convince herself everything was fine. She never told me directly, Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. But she did once tell me that she felt trapped, like she couldn't get away from him. She paused, her hands trembling. She didn't know how to break up with him without making things worse. Dillard leaned forward, his expression more intense now. What do you mean by making things worse? She was scared of what he might do, Rachel said, swallowing hard. Not just emotionally, but physically. She was scared of him, Frank, and I... She broke off, choking on the words she had never said aloud before. I should have done something. I should have told someone. Dillard's face softened, but his eyes remained sharp. You're not responsible for what happened to Chloe. We all missed things, Rachel. This is about what we can do now, what we can still find. The room fell silent. Rachel felt the weight of those words settle over her, the guilt that had been haunting her for decades now pressing down on her chest. She wasn't sure what had changed, but something inside her had snapped. The years of avoiding the truth, of pretending that everything had been okay, had finally caught up with her. Dillard closed the folder, his gaze never leaving Rachel's face. I need your help, Rachel. We're going to bring this to the surface together. Rachel took a deep breath. The ghosts of the past were coming to life again, and this time she wasn't going to run from them. Not anymore. Evan Miller hadn't been to Little Rock High in years, but it still felt like a second skin. The old brick buildings, the rusted bleachers by the football field, and the large oak tree where he and Chloe had once sat in the afternoons, sketching the world around them. It was all still there, but it wasn't the same. Nothing ever stayed the same. Rachel found him in the small cafe on Main Street, where the coffee was strong and the chairs always creaked when you sat down. Evan looked older, but the same quiet intensity in his eyes remained. His art had carried him far. He'd become a respected painter, but no matter where he went, the weight of that night, of Chloe, followed him. I wasn't expecting you, Rachel said as she sat across from him, her voice uncertain. It had been so long since they'd spoken, but in many ways it felt like no time had passed at all. Evan placed his coffee down gently, his hand steady but his gaze distant. I know, I didn't expect to come back either, but I heard about the reopening of the case. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Rachel studied him, trying to read the quiet man she had known years ago. Evan, I've been thinking about what you said before, about Chloe, about how she was trying to get away from Tyler. She hesitated, the memories making her stomach churn. I need to know what you saw that night. Evan shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his hair as if trying to push the thoughts away. I didn't tell anyone before, Rachel. I didn't think it would matter, but now maybe it does. He paused, looking at her. Chloe. She wasn't herself that night. She told me she needed space. And then when I saw her with Tyler, I could tell something was wrong. The way she looked at him. It wasn't just anger. It was fear. Rachel's breath caught in her chest. What do you mean, fear? She didn't want to leave with him, Evan said softly, his voice tinged with regret. But he wouldn't let her go. She said she was tired of pretending, Rachel, tired of pretending everything was fine with him. She wanted out, and he wasn't letting her. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest as she absorbed his words. She had always known something had been off about Tyler and Chloe's relationship, but hearing it from Evan, someone who had witnessed the tension, made it real in a way she hadn't expected. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" she asked, a trace of hurt in her voice. "You could have helped her, Evan." He looked down at his coffee, his eyes dark with the weight of guilt. "I didn't want to get involved. I thought maybe I was reading too much into it. But now—" He let out a deep sigh. "Now I wish I had done something." Rachel stared at him, her mind racing. "You saw it, Evan. You saw the signs." "We both did." She stood up, a sense of urgency rising in her chest. "This isn't just about the past anymore. It's about making sure the truth comes out." Evan nodded slowly, his expression resigned. "I know. I'll help however I can." As Rachel left the cafe, her heart felt heavy with the burden of their shared secrets. They had both buried the truth for far too long, but now it was time to bring it into the light. The past had been waiting for them to wake up, and they couldn't turn away anymore. The Arkansas River hadn't changed much since 1995. The water still moved with the same slow persistence, the same murky calm that made it seem harmless, until it wasn't. Rachel stood near the old bridge, her breath visible in the cool morning air. Time had weathered the structure, but the weight of memory hung there heavier than ever. Detective Dillard met her at the edge of the embankment, his hands buried in the pockets of his coat. "Appreciate you coming out," he said quietly. "We've been re-examining the area since the case reopened." Rachel looked down toward the river. "I thought everything from that night was already searched." "It was," Dillard replied, "but the current changes. Sometimes things the river hides find their way back." A team of forensic investigators was stationed beneath the bridge. One of them waved Dillard over, holding something small in a gloved hand. As he approached, Rachel followed, her pulse quickening. The investigator spoke carefully. "Found this wedged under a piece of driftwood, about a foot below the surface." He opened his hand to reveal a tarnished charm bracelet, its chain rusted, its once bright charms dulled by years underwater. Rachel gasped softly. "That's hers," she whispered. "Chloe's. I remember it. Her mother gave it to her for her 16th birthday." Dillard examined it closely. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," Rachel said, her voice trembling. "She never took it off." The investigator slipped the bracelet into an evidence bag. "We'll get it to the lab." There might be something left. Skin cells, DNA, anything. For a moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the trees and the low rush of the river. Rachel stared at the water, memories pulling her back to that night. The laughter, the flicker of the bonfire, the sound of Chloe's voice over the music. Then the silence. Always the silence. Back at the station, Dillard laid the evidence on his desk. The years had made him cautious, but something about this discovery stirred an old instinct. He looked over at Rachel, who sat quietly in the corner, her eyes distant. "I know this isn't easy," he said, "but this could be what breaks it open. We'll get the DNA processed and see what turns up." Rachel nodded slowly. "What if it leads to someone we know?" Dillard met her gaze. "Then we deal with it. The truth doesn't care how much time has passed." Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Rachel walked alone along the bridge. The river below reflected the last light of day, the surface calm but deceptive. She thought of Chloe, her laughter, her dreams, the way she used to talk about leaving Little Rock. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Dillard. "Forensics found something on the bracelet. Call me." Rachel's hands shook as she read the words. After 25 years of silence, the river had finally spoken, but deep down she wondered if she was ready to hear what it had to say. Tyler Ray had been the face of Little Rock for as long as anyone could remember. He was the star quarterback, the popular guy everyone wanted to know. His father ran the largest car dealership in town, and his mother had been a beloved teacher at the high school. On the surface, Tyler was the perfect son, the perfect boyfriend, the perfect all-American kid. But Rachel knew better. She remembered the way he'd snapped at Chloe during a school dance, how he'd dragged her away from their group of friends, his hands tight on her arm. She'd heard rumors too, whispered under breath, about his short temper and controlling behavior. She'd told herself it was just a phase, that it would pass, but she always had a nagging feeling that something was off. Tyler had dropped off the radar after Chloe's death. He wasn't seen around town, didn't show up at the school memorial, and most of his friends stopped asking about him. It wasn't until a few months ago that anyone had heard from him again. Rachel sat at the bar of a local diner one afternoon when she saw him walk through the door. Tyler's presence was as commanding as ever. He was older now, his features sharper, but the same confidence that had made him a high school legend still hung around him like a cloud. He walked past Rachel without a glance, as if he didn't even recognize her. But Rachel felt her heart race. She hadn't seen him in years, yet the memories of Chloe of that night flooded back like a tide. Tyler sat at a booth ordering coffee, his back turned to her. Rachel couldn't keep the urge to speak to him at bay. She got up, her legs stiff, and made her way to his table. "Tyler," she said, her voice even but filled with unspoken history. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as if assessing whether this encounter was worth his time. "Rachel, it's been a long time. I heard you were back in town," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "The cold case, it's reopened. They're asking questions again." Tyler's smile was thin, almost imperceptible. "Is that so?" he said, his voice smooth, but something in it was strained. He didn't seem genuinely surprised, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. Rachel pressed on, not willing to let the moment slip away. "You were questioned, weren't you? When Chloe died. Why did you leave after that? Did you think you could just disappear?" Tyler's hand tightened around his coffee cup, the knuckles turning white. "You really think you know everything, don't you?" His voice dropped, low and almost dangerous. "I didn't disappear. I just moved on." Rachel's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. "Did you, Tyler, or did you just bury the truth?" His gaze hardened, and for a moment the small-town hero seemed to crumble, just a bit. "You don't know anything about me, Rachel. You never did." He stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I don't owe you anything." As he walked out of the diner, Rachel felt the weight of his words. Tyler was hiding something, and the mask he wore for so many years was beginning to crack. The pressure was building, and she could feel it. Whatever happened that night by the river, the truth was getting closer. Tyler couldn't run from it forever. The following week, the town of Little Rock buzzed with rumors. News about Tyler Ray's return to town spread like wildfire, and with it came questions, unanswered questions. Why had he left so suddenly all those years ago? Why had he avoided the reopening of the investigation? And why, after all these years, did he finally come back? Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Every interaction, every look, every word from Tyler now felt charged with something unsaid. It was like the clock had started ticking again, and the town, so used to quiet, had suddenly been forced to listen. That night, she sat in the small diner again, the low hum of conversation around her. Detective Dillard had called earlier to meet her, and she could sense the urgency in his voice. She was still unsure about what had changed, but she knew they were getting closer. The truth, whatever it was within reach. Dillard arrived, his expression grim. "We got the results back from the bracelet," he said, sliding a file across the table. "And it's not just Chloe's, there's a match." Rachel's stomach dropped. "A match?" she repeated, almost afraid to ask. He nodded. "The DNA from the bracelet doesn't belong to Chloe. It belongs to Tyler Ray." Rachel felt her heart race. She'd known something wasn't right, but hearing it spoken aloud, hearing it confirmed, made it feel all the more real. "So, he was there that night?" Dillard's face darkened. "It's more than that, Rachel. This suggests he was physically involved. But there's still a lot we need to prove." The weight of his words sank into Rachel's chest, and for the first time she felt an odd mix of relief and fear. Relief because the truth was finally coming to light, but fear because now everything was about to change. The Tyler she had known, the one who was perfect in the eyes of everyone, wasn't who she had believed him to be. "I need to talk to him," Rachel said suddenly, her voice firm, determined. "I need to hear it from him." Dillard's brow furrowed. "Rachel, you're walking into dangerous territory. You don't know what he might do when cornered. Let us handle it." But Rachel shook her head. "No, this has been too long coming. I need him to say it, to admit it." Dillard hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but I'm not letting you go in alone. We'll be watching from a distance. If you're going to do this, you need to be careful." The evening air was heavy with anticipation as Rachel made her way to Tyler's place, the large house that had always seemed like a fortress, the one that had loomed over the town like a symbol of power and success. As she stood outside, her hand resting on the iron gate, she could feel the weight of all the years that had passed, of all the unspoken things, of the lie she had told herself for so long. She rang the doorbell. Tyler opened the door, his face calm, but his eyes betrayed him, flickering with something darker. "Rachel," he said coolly, "I didn't expect to see you again." "I'm not here for a reunion, Tyler," Rachel said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "I'm here for answers." Tyler's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Rachel stepped forward. "You owe it to Chloe and to yourself to tell the truth. What happened that night?" Tyler's eyes darted to the side, and Rachel knew. She knew it wouldn't be long now. The courtroom was heavy with tension, the air thick with anticipation. Little Rock's most prominent citizens sat in the wooden pews, faces twisted with curiosity, disbelief, and judgment. Rachel had never imagined that the case, which had haunted her for so many years, would lead to this moment. Tyler Ray, the golden boy of Little Rock, now seated in front of a judge, facing the truth of what he had done. Tyler's lawyer had already argued for a lesser sentence, speaking about his community service, his work with local charities, and the family reputation that had made him the town's pillar. He was the boy everyone had thought was incapable of harm, but Rachel knew the truth was darker, and the charm that had protected him for years was finally cracking. Rachel sat in the back of the courtroom, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had come this far, but hearing everything laid out, the words she had once avoided, the truth, felt suffocating. The prosecutor, a young woman with dark, sharp eyes, had just finished outlining the events of that night, the testimony from Evan Miller and the damning DNA evidence from Chloe's bracelet. The judge's gavel struck, and the room fell into silence. It was time for Tyler to speak. Tyler stood up slowly, his gaze cold and calculated. The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on him. He adjusted his tie, his fingers trembling slightly, but his voice, when it came, was steady. "I did what I had to do," Tyler said, his words cutting through the stillness. "Chloe, she was going to ruin everything. I couldn't let her leave me." His eyes flickered across the room, but they never met Rachel's. A gasp echoed through the courtroom as Tyler continued. "She didn't understand what she meant to me. She thought she could just walk away, but she couldn't. I loved her, and I didn't want to lose her." His words were calculated, rehearsed, a twisted version of the truth. He was trying to justify himself. Rachel felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had hoped, somewhere deep down, that this moment would bring her the closure she needed, but hearing him speak, hearing him twist everything, made the ache in her chest grow. Tyler's selfishness, his arrogance, it was all laid bare. The prosecutor wasted no time. "What happened that night, Tyler? You say you loved her, but that doesn't explain the bruises on her wrists, the marks that show she fought to get away from you. You didn't love her, you trapped her." Tyler flinched, his jaw clenching. But he didn't say anything. The truth was finally catching up to him. Rachel stood, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment she had waited for, the moment she had feared. She stepped toward the front of the courtroom, her voice clear but full of raw emotion. "You didn't love her, Tyler. You controlled her. You didn't let her live her life. You kept her prisoner in your lies, and you let her die." Tyler's eyes flickered with something. Guilt, fear, or perhaps something deeper, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He turned his face away, and the courtroom held its breath, waiting for the inevitable. The judge looked down at Tyler, then at the prosecutor. "The court will deliberate. This trial is adjourned." As the room slowly emptied, Rachel stood still, her heart heavy with what had just unfolded. The trial wasn't over yet, but for the first time in years, Rachel felt the weight of the past lifting just a little. The truth had been spoken. Now it was up to the court to decide what justice would look like. The verdict came on a grey Friday morning. The courthouse was packed. Reporters, townspeople, faces Rachel hadn't seen in decades. The same people who once called Tyler Ray a hero now whispered behind their hands, waiting for the judge's words to strip away the last of his facade. Rachel sat near the back, her fingers interlaced tightly. She had told herself she was ready for this moment, but her heart still hammered in her chest. Every second dragged, every sound amplified, the shuffling of papers, the clearing of a throat, the low murmur of anticipation. The judge entered, his voice calm but firm. After reviewing the evidence presented, including the defendant's own testimony and corroborating witness statements, the court finds Tyler Ray guilty of manslaughter in the death of Chloe Benson. The words hit Rachel like a slow wave. Not murder, manslaughter. Justice, but only partially. She heard a woman behind her gasp, then the sound of someone crying softly. Tyler sat motionless at the defense table, his expression unreadable, his jaw tight. The judge continued. The court acknowledges the defendant's lack of intent to kill, but recognizes his culpability in the events that led to Ms. Benson's death. The sentence will be determined at a later date. Rachel looked at Tyler. For a brief moment, his eyes flicked toward her. There was no remorse, no apology, only exhaustion, the hollow look of a man whose lies had finally collapsed. Outside the courthouse, the sky hung low and heavy with rain. Reporters crowded the steps, their microphones and cameras thrust forward as they shouted questions. Rachel pushed past them, her voice steady when she finally spoke. "It's not about winning," she said quietly. "It's about the truth finally being heard." Dillard was waiting near the edge of the crowd. His coat was soaked from the drizzle, but his eyes were warm. "You did good, Rachel," he said. "You stood up when nobody else would." She shook her head. "We all should have stood up back then. Maybe it wouldn't have taken 25 years. Dillard nodded, the weight of age in his posture. "The world moves slow when it comes to justice, but it moves." They stood there in silence for a moment, watching the rain fall over the courthouse steps. The sound was soft, rhythmic, like the river that had started it all. Later that evening, Rachel drove down to the water's edge. The same bridge where Chloe's bracelet had been found loomed in the distance, its steel frame rusted but still standing. She walked along the bank until she reached the spot where the water lapped gently at the shore. "I wish you could see this," she whispered. "He's finally been held accountable. It doesn't change what happened, but maybe it lets you rest." The wind stirred, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and pine. Rachel stood there for a long while, the sound of the river wrapping around her like a memory she could finally breathe through. She turned back toward the car, her reflection rippling on the surface. For the first time in 25 years, she felt the current move in her favor. The past hadn't disappeared, but it had finally stopped chasing her. The morning after the verdict, Rachel woke to the sound of rain tapping against her window, a steady rhythm that matched the tension in her chest. The rain had arrived suddenly, as if the heavens themselves had released the weight that had been hanging over Little Rock for so long. The truth had finally come out, but the relief was fleeting. It felt like a chapter closing only for another, even heavier, to begin. The trial was over, but Tyler's sentencing loomed. The town was divided. Some were relieved that justice, however imperfect, had been served. Others couldn't shake the image of the golden boy now condemned, his life forever tainted by his crime. To many, Tyler Ray had been the shining example of Little Rock, a symbol of success. But to Rachel he was nothing more than the embodiment of the lies that had been buried for too long. She had hoped the truth would set her free, but instead it left her with a lingering ache, the same one that had gnawed at her for 25 years. Chloe's face haunted her still, the unanswered questions swirling in her mind. The bracelet found beneath the bridge, Tyler's DNA on it, had provided the final piece, but Rachel wasn't sure it had made anything easier. Walking into the courtroom that day, Rachel had expected to feel a sense of closure, but now it felt as if the air was heavier than before. Chloe was still gone. Tyler still walked the earth, still able to live the life that had once been denied to Chloe. And though justice had been served, Rachel wasn't sure it would ever feel like enough. As she walked through the streets of Little Rock, the rain fell steadily, as if trying to wash away the remnants of the past. But the memories clung to her like a second skin. She passed by familiar places, the diner, the old high school building, and each one seemed to carry a weight of its own, like the ghosts of the past were still walking beside her, just out of sight. Rachel paused outside the old bridge, the same one where Chloe's body had been found. The water below was still and grey, reflecting the cloudy sky above. It was hard to believe so much time had passed. 25 years. In some ways it felt like yesterday, in others like a lifetime. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs. "I did it for you," she whispered. "I did it for both of us." Behind her a car pulled up slowly, the tires skimming the wet pavement. She didn't need to turn around to know it was Dillard. He stepped out of the car, his familiar, weathered face solemn as he walked toward her. "You all right?" he asked, his voice gentle but concerned. Rachel nodded. "I think I am. But it's strange, you know. I thought once the truth came out things would feel different." Dillard sighed, standing next to her and looking at the river. "The truth doesn't always fix things, Rachel. It just makes you face them." The rain began to slow, and for the first time in days, there was a brief moment of stillness. Rachel felt a wave of calm wash over her, a quiet understanding that, even though the past could never be fully erased, it was finally out in the open, and that, she thought, was enough. She didn't have all the answers, but maybe she didn't need them. Maybe this was the beginning of something else, the beginning of finally letting go. As she walked away from the bridge, the sound of the rain began to fade, and with it, the weight she had carried for so long. The past was still there, but it no longer held her hostage. Weeks passed after the verdict, and Little Rock slowly began to find its rhythm again. The courthouse became a memory, like so many other chapters in the town's history that people whispered about, but soon forgot. The rain had washed away the last traces of the trial, and life, as it always does, started moving forward. Rachel returned to the old house, now empty after her mother's passing, and packed up the memories of a life she had left behind. The weight of the past still clung to her, but something had shifted. The questions that had once haunted her no longer seemed to hold the same power. She had faced them, stood in the light of the truth, and for the first time in years she felt like she could breathe. But it wasn't just her past that had been stirred by the trial. The town, too, had been forced to confront its own darkness. Tyler Ray's name still lingered on the lips of many, though not in the same reverent tones it once had. There was still disbelief in the air, a collective unease. How could someone who had seemed so perfect, so untouchable, be capable of something so dark? Rachel found herself back at the river more than once, staring out at the water. It had always been a constant in her life, but now it felt like a symbol of everything that had happened. The river was silent, but its currents ran deep, hiding the secrets of a time long past. It felt as though the river had swallowed the truth for so long, and now it was content to keep it there. One evening, as she sat on the banks of the Arkansas River, Rachel finally allowed herself to speak aloud. "I didn't forget you, Chloe, I couldn't. But I think I'm ready to let go." Her voice was barely a whisper against the sound of the water, but it felt like a release, a finality. The truth had come to light. Chloe's memory had been restored, and justice, in its imperfect form, had been served. Yet the river, ever constant, continued to flow, carrying with it the weight of everything it had seen. Rachel wondered how many other stories were buried beneath its surface, stories that, like hers, were never meant to be forgotten, but were forced to be. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the river in hues of orange and pink, its surface rippling gently. Rachel stood up and took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs. As she walked back toward the old bridge, she didn't look back. The river would always be there, and so would Chloe's memory. But Rachel had finally found peace, and it was time to move forward. The secrets the river kept were no longer hers to carry.